Senate's first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit. A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang. Gyeongju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values preserved over time have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins. As APEC and Gyeongju come together. APEC meets Gyeongju.
In our headlines on this Tuesday, November 4th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung speaks of tripling next year's government spending on AI-related projects, stressing that the transition to artificial intelligence is essential, not optional. Also, here in Seoul, Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and his U.S. counterpart Pete Hegseth hold their annual talks on this Tuesday and reaffirm their security commitment. Meanwhile, consumer prices here rise faster than forecast in October, hitting 2.4% on year, driven by higher prices of agricultural and fishery products. We start with comments by President Lee Jae-myung calling for tripling spending on AI infrastructure expansion and technology. The call came during an address at the National Assembly about his administration's budget for next year. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
The focus of the 2026 budget proposal was on seeking new growth engines, with President Lee Jae-myung calling it the very first budget to open up the era of AI.
국제 무역 통상 질서의 재편과 인공지능 대전환의 파도 앞에서 국가 생존을 모색해야 할 절체절명의 위기에 처해 있습니다. 이제는 인공지능 시대의 고속도로를 구축해서 도약과 성장의 새로운 미래를 열어야 합니다.
The government has projected a record high of 728 trillion won, or over $508 billion for next year's budget, up 8% from this year. Nearly $7 billion has been earmarked for AI-related projects, 3 times higher than this year's spending, with a focus on physical AI and use of the technology in robots and automobiles. Next year's defense spending will be expanded by more than 8%. Worth over $46 billion, with more use of AI by the defense forces, as the commander-in-chief called for self-reliant defense.
전 세계 5위의 군사력으로 평가받는 우리 대한민국이 국방을 외부에 의존한다는 것은 우리 국민의 자존심 문제 아니겠습니까?
Other areas of focus were on the R&D budget, which will be a record high, as well as the so-called National Growth Fund, NK Culture. He also vowed to secure a social safety net and help small business owners through local consumption coupons. And looking back on last week's diplomatic super week, the president said uncertainties over the economy have been eased by reaching a trade deal with the U.S. As the president called for across-the-aisle collaboration, speaking before a 2/3 full Congress, following a boycott by the main opposition People Power Party over an arrest warrant against its party member.
좀 허전하군요.
The mood was starkly contrasting as the ruling Democratic Party lawmakers responded to the president with rounds of applause. The legal deadline for the parliamentary budget review is set for December 2nd. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
As mentioned in that report, the main opposition People Power Party chose to opt out of the president's budget speech at the parliament in protest of what the party calls political oppression. Our National Assembly correspondent Moon Hae-ryun has details.
South Korea's main opposition, People Power Party, boycotted President Lee Jae-myung's policy speech at the National Assembly on Tuesday, protesting what it calls political oppression by the government. The president's address, which urged lawmakers to swiftly pass next year's budget, went ahead without the conservative bloc, leaving what some described as a half-empty chamber. Wearing black masks and ribbons reading Mourning for Liberal Democracy, opposition lawmakers staged a silent protest on the steps of the main hall, condemning the recent arrest warrant request for former floor leader Chu Kyung-ho in relation to the failed martial law order last December. Inside the chamber, the president began his remarks by acknowledging the empty seats, but expressed hope that all parties ultimately share the same goal, serving the people. The Speaker of the National Assembly, Woo Won-sik, opened the session by welcoming the president's visit, noting that while political discord remains, cooperation is vital.
Since this is a very crucial time, I believe it's especially important for the National Assembly and the government to work closely together and take a step forward in cooperation.
He praised the administration's diplomatic gains at the recent APEC leaders' meeting, saying they restored market confidence and national pride. Democratic Party lawmakers applauded repeatedly throughout the president's 22-minute speech, particularly as he highlighted the government's efforts to stabilize the economy and improve citizens' livelihoods. Meanwhile, the Special Committee on Budget and Accounts is set to begin its review of the 2026 spending plan this week, starting with a public hearing on Wednesday, followed by policy questioning sessions and detailed ministry-by-ministry deliberations through mid-November. A final vote is scheduled before the legal deadline of December 2nd, though sharp partisan divisions could delay passage. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And President Lee Jae-myung says his sideline summits last week on the margins of the multilateral APEC meeting were a success, but simply a start.
자국의 이익을 지키려는 이 총성 없는 전쟁은 계속될 것으로 보여집니다. 그리고 국제사회 질서의 불확실성도 단기간에 해소되지 않을 겁니다. 그럴수록 우리는 담대한 용기, 치밀한 준비, 하나된 힘을 바탕으로 국익을 지키고 국력을 키워서
At Tuesday's cabinet meeting, the president called on relevant ministries to follow through with commitments made during the bilateral exchanges and called for bipartisan support to carry them out. He further called on his cabinet to make note of the individuals who played a part in ensuring diplomatic gains. On the security front, Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and his U.S. counterpart Pete Hegseth held their annual talks here in Seoul earlier on this Tuesday. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has the latest.
The South Korean and U.S. defense chiefs reaffirmed the steadfastness of the ROK-U.S. alliance during their annual security talks, the 57th Security Consultative Meeting on Tuesday. A joint communique was not released, waiting for a joint fact sheet for the two countries to come out first. Still, Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did share some parts of the discussion they had during the meeting.
We've had many meetings and discussions to find ways to strengthen defense cooperation based on mutual trust and teamwork, so we can respond to the rapidly changing security situation and build a future-oriented and friendly alliance.
While underlining the need to boost defense ties grounded in realism, the U.S. defense chief again stated that Trump wants allies to be strong. Noting that South Korea is a model ally, Hegseth said he was encouraged by South Korea's commitment to increase defense spending and make greater investments in ROK military capabilities. To modernize the alliance and boost ties, the two allies agreed on some practical steps, including having U.S. warships be repaired in South Korea, with more to come.
Maintaining warships in theater will also ensure our most lethal capabilities remain ready to respond to any crisis. Soon, we also plan to expand our cooperation to maintaining ground equipment in Korea as well.
When it comes to nuclear-powered submarines, the Pentagon is going to work closely with other departments to fulfill President Trump's commitment, Hegseth added. Asked to whether the U.S. forces Korea could be used against China in the Taiwan Strait, he underlined the importance of flexibility, but said the USFK is oriented to protect South Korea from the north.
There's no doubt flexibility for regional contingencies is something we would take a look at, but we are focused on standing by our allies here and ensuring the threat of the DPRK is not a threat to the Republic of Korea, and certainly continue to extend nuclear deterrence as we have before.
The comment resonates with the two defense chiefs' earlier visit to the joint security area within the demilitarized zone on Monday for the first time in 8 years. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea has resorted to visible displays that would be of force in recent days to coincide with diplomatic events here in South Korea. Now, this is according to the Joint Chiefs of Staff on this Tuesday. The regime fired about 10 rounds from its multiple rocket launchers into waters of the northern part of the West Sea, both this past Saturday and Monday afternoons. The first firings came about half an hour before the Seoul-Beijing summit, while the latter took place about half an hour before U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth arrived near the DMZ to meet Defense Minister An Gyu-baek. The U.S. is moving to slap new sanctions on 7 ships suspected of selling North Korean coal to China. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
The United States has moved to impose new sanctions on 7 ships accused of violating United Nations Security Council resolutions by smuggling North Korean coal and iron ore. According to Reuters, Washington will soon ask the UN North Korea Sanctions Committee to blacklist the vessels, which allegedly transported the banned minerals to China and other destinations. A senior U.S. official said North Korea earns between $200 and $400 million annually through such illegal exports, which are used to fund its nuclear and missile programs. The official also revealed that in May and June, a North Korean vessel named Shinpyeong-6 transferred coal to a Sierra Leone flagged ship called Fly Free on the high seas, later offloading at China's Weifang port. However, to enact the sanctions, all UN Security Council members must agree unanimously. But with China and Russia both having close diplomatic ties to Pyongyang and holding veto powers, the proposal faces steep obstacles. If adopted, the 7 ships could be barred from entering ports worldwide, and related shipping firms or individuals could face asset freezes and travel bans. Analysts say the move underscores Washington's effort to tighten financial pressure on the Kim Jong-un regime amid renewed concerns over North Korea's weapons development and deepening ties with Moscow and Beijing. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Unification Ministry here has undergone major restructuring aimed at reviving dialogue with North Korea. The ministry has reinstated the Inter-Korean Dialogue Headquarters, which was abolished under the previous Yoon Suk-yeol administration, along with a Bureau for Peace and Exchange and a team that oversees issues related to the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Also, an office that focused on North Korean human rights was dissolved and replaced by a new Bureau for Socio-Cultural Cooperation. A new unit for public dialogue on unification policy has also been launched. North Korea's former ceremonial head of state Kim Young-nam has died. According to the regime state media, the 97-year-old died from multiple organ failure. He was one of Pyongyang's most prominent diplomats, serving under 3 generations of leadership. He was best known internationally for leading North Korea's delegation to the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics here in South Korea, where he met then-President Moon Jae-in. North Korea's Kim Jong-un was at the funeral hall in Pyongyang earlier on this Tuesday morning to pay tribute. Consumer prices here in South Korea rose faster than forecast in October to hit 2.4% on year. Our Eun-jin has more.
South Korea's consumer prices grew at the fastest pace in 15 months in October. According to data released by the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Tuesday, South Korea's consumer prices last month increased 2.4% from a year earlier. This marks the largest on-year increase since July 2024, when they increased by 2.6%. Looking at 2025, on-year consumer price increases have been higher than the Bank of Korea's target of 2% from January to April, then slowed slightly in May to 1.9% before going back above the 2% mark for June and July. On-year consumer price increases briefly slowed to 1.7% in August, but then climbed over 2% again in September before hitting a new high for the year in October. The ministry said that October's figures were primarily due to a sharp increase in prices for agricultural and fishery products, which jumped 3.1%, adding 0.25 percentage points to the overall figure. Pork in particular rose 6.1%, and mackerel rose 11%. Processed food and petroleum products also added upward pressure on prices, rising 3.5% and 4.8% respectively. Core inflation, which excludes energy prices and foods that often see short-term price fluctuations, rose 2.2% in October, which is higher than September's 2% increase. 이은진, Arirang News.
In other news, Beijing has extended its visa-free policy for dozens of countries by another year. Accordingly, South Koreans planning to travel to China for business or pleasure can do so without a visa for up to 30 days until the end of 2026. Our An Sung-jin reports.
China has extended its visa-free entry policy for South Korean nationals for another year. This allows a short-term stay of up to 30 days for tourism, business, or family visits until December 31st, 2026. The announcement was made on Monday by China's Foreign Ministry as part of a plan to make travel more convenient and strengthen international exchanges.
To facilitate cross-border travel between Chinese and foreign nationals, China has decided to extend the visa-free policy for France and several other countries until December 31st, 2026.
The extension applies to 45 countries that were already covered by the temporary visa-free policy, including South Korea, Japan, France, and others. Adding to the list, China will expand the policy to include Sweden starting from November 10th. Analysts say this decision reflects positive momentum in bilateral relations between South Korea and China following the recent summit talks between the country's leaders on the sidelines of the APEC Economic Leaders meeting in Gyeongju. South Korea has also been implementing its own temporary visa-free policy for Chinese group tourists since last September to encourage reciprocal tourism and improve people-to-people exchanges. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And one farm in Gyeonggi-do province is using coffee grounds to grow mushrooms, and it says yield is up while costs are down. Our Cha Yun-kyung explains.
This is a farm for oyster mushrooms in Gyeonggi-do province. It seems like a normal cultivation facility, but there's a special secret hidden in the substrate the mushrooms are growing on, used coffee grounds. By mixing the grounds with traditional substrate materials, the mushroom yield increased by an average of 8%.
The coffee grounds are rich in nutrients like lipids and crude protein. When the right conditions are provided, the results show a remarkable boost in mushroom production.
It's not just mushroom yields that have increased. Coffee grounds are more than 50% cheaper than traditional substrate materials, such as cottonseed meal and beet pulp, making them highly cost-effective. As a result, the grounds are gaining attention as a prime example of resource-circulating agriculture, reusing agri-food byproducts in farming.
We found that coffee grounds replace about 10% of beet pulp and cottonseed meal in the substrate. We will present a standardized substrate formula using coffee waste and promote its supply among farmers.
Used coffee grounds are creating a virtuous cycle of resource circulation, boosting farmers' income while also contributing to environmental protection. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Starting in Afghanistan, a 6.3 magnitude earthquake has killed at least 20 people and injured more than 640 others. The quake struck early Monday morning local time, shaking the northern part of the country and destroying hundreds of homes. Hospitals are treating dozens of people in critical condition, and rescuers say the number of casualties is still rising. Local authorities also report damage to a major historic mosque, though the structure remains standing. The Taliban government says emergency teams are working in affected areas and the United Nations has begun delivering aid. However, rescue efforts are being slowed by blocked roads and poor communication in mountain villages. In the United States, as the government shutdown enters its second month, the Trump administration says it will provide reduced food aid to more than 42 million Americans. The decision follows a court order from federal judges in Massachusetts and Rhode Island directing the Department of Agriculture to use $5.25 billion in emergency funds to make partial payments to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as food stamps. The SNAP program, which supports low-income households, normally costs around $8 billion per month, but has been unfunded since October 1st. The reduced food stamp payments are expected to reach families later this week. In Rome, rescue teams have freed a worker trapped for nearly 12 hours after the partial collapse of a medieval tower undergoing restoration. The man was pulled from the rubble of the Torre dei Conti and taken to hospital late on Monday. The tower, built in the 13th century, first gave way late in the morning on Monday, injuring another worker before part of the structure collapsed again during the rescue. Authorities have cordoned off the area as engineers assess what caused the collapse. In Paris, fast fashion retailer Shein's first permanent store is set to open on Wednesday amid a fierce backlash. The planned store inside the prestigious 19th century BHV department store building has sparked outrage and protests from workers and ethical brands, warning it undermines France's anti-fast fashion laws and Paris's progressive image. Several French companies, including Disneyland Paris, have withdrawn partnerships, while city officials called the move a provocation. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
The southern cold has receded and the typical autumn weather for this time of year returned this afternoon. The maximum temperature in Seoul topped out at 16 degrees Celsius during the day today. Southern regions saw higher daytime temperatures at around 20 degrees. As the temperature rises sharply during the day, the daily temperature range between morning and day widens. As we go into the second half of the week, the temperature will rise even more, going above the average levels. Temperatures in Seoul will move up to 19 degrees both tomorrow and Thursday. Seoul and Gyeongju will start off at 6 degrees tomorrow morning, with Daegu at 7 degrees. Daily highs will rise up to 18 to 22 degrees across the country. Rain is expected in the eastern parts of Gangwon-do province on Friday and in the south and Jeju Island over the weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, and today we touch upon South Korea's trade deal with the U.S. following talks between their leaders last week.
자연으로 다시 돌아간다. 이게 그 신발이구나.
100% 생분해야 되는 신발입니다.
야, 너무 신기하다. 언나커즈 검증 타임. Let's go.
저기 걸으면 이렇게 압력이 나올 거예요. 그래서 실제로 얼마만큼의 힘이 들어가고 스트레스를 몸에서 받는지도 바로 측정을 하는 것이죠. 그래프를 보시면 달리기를 하고 근육의 활성도가 피로도가 왔기 때문에 떨어졌고 이제 리커버리 신발을 신고 휴식을 취하고 난 뒤에 데이터를 보시면 짧은 시간 안에 근 활성도가 현저히 증가한 것을 확인하실 수 있습니다. 그럼 결론적으로는 피로도가 리커버리 되었다.
Officially certified by the American Orthopedic Association and attracting global investors left and right. Finalists at the world's largest outdoor trade fair. How about a fast post-run recovery?
How to survive in Korea. Cafes. Step 1. Find a seat. Before ordering, find a seat. Laptop, ID, smartphone, jacket, whatever that can mark your territory. But no bites. It's a little too big. Step 2. Pick up. We do not ask or call your name. We call out, B69 고객님. The buzzer will vibrate when your order is ready at the counter. Wait, got your straw? Keep the top of the wrapper on. Doing this is more hygienic. Step 3. Cafe etiquette. If you need to use your laptop, find a seat next to a socket. No extra charge for using electricity. But if you're staying over 3 hours, how about ordering another drink or dessert? Step 4. Last bite standing. There's a mysterious custom in Korea. The last bite standing. When there's about 1 bite left of that cake, nobody will go for it. You might be tempted, but don't be hasty. Right before you get up, take the last piece saying that you simply can't waste food, or just leave it. It will save a few calories. Did you survive at the cafe? Did someone behind the counter catch your eye? Go for the same drink every single day.
오늘도 아이스 말차 라떼 드실 거죠?
You might make an impression.
On Press Perspective today, we revisit South Korea's tariff and investment agreement with the U.S. as the two allies seek to strengthen their ties. Do stay with us. Hello, welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, November 4th, here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today, trade ties between Seoul and Washington dominate our discussions, especially in light of last week's talks between President Lee Jae-myung and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump in Gyeongju. For more, I have Thomas Moresca with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, welcome back.
Thanks, great to be here.
I also have Professor Oh Jun-seok at Sookmyung Women's University joining our session virtually. Professor Oh, the weather here in Seoul has gotten much colder. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, it's autumn.
It is, Professor, it is. We'll start the discussion here in the studio. Thomas, let's begin with details of the trade deal between Seoul and Washington and the talks, of course, between the leaders last week in Gyeongju.
Yeah, sure. You almost said free trade, and I was going to say that's the opposite of what they had. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, South Korea sees this as a successful negotiation. Much of the framework had kind of been worked out already in July, but there were some details and sticking points, particularly with South Korea's investment that they agreed to into the U.S. But basically what ended up coming out of this deal, which was between Trump and Lee Jae-myung and the sideline of APEC, was these sort of so-called reciprocal tariffs that were 25% were reduced to 15%, as well as there were separate 25% tariffs on autos and auto parts. Those were also knocked down to 15%, which is important for South Korea because that's where Japan is, the main sort of auto export competitor. So Japan is at 15%. So that's a best case, I guess, scenario for South Korea. The main sticking point was this: South Korea had pledged $350 billion of investment into the U.S. 150 of that was going to be in shipbuilding cooperation. But then there was this kind of $200 billion in cash investments that was this nebulous sum. And, there was a lot of concern on the South Korean side that this could really, practically empty out the foreign exchange reserves if it was demanded all at once. But they negotiated, cash payments on an annual basis capped out at $20 billion a year. So that, was sort of eases concern over draining these foreign exchange reserves. And South Korea also received assurances that the semiconductor industry will not be disadvantaged relative to Taiwan, another important, main competitor. And, just a few other side things. South Korea was able to defend some of its agriculture sectors. That was a concern, like beef and rice being, imported from the U.S. Agreed to buy some U.S. liquefied natural gas, and two sides talked about some, increasing collaboration in some strategic science and technology areas. So, I think overall, I think the professor can elaborate on this for sure, but I think the reaction, for the most part, has generally been seen as positive on the South Korean side from analysts and just sort of regular folks I talk to.
Right then, Professor Oh, first, what are your general thoughts about this trade deal between South Korea and the U.S.? And second, can you put into some tangible perspective the 15% tariff on South Korean goods entering the U.S. market? I mean, what does this mean for our exports to the U.S.?
Firstly, we barely dodged the bullet, and secondly, we could manage to keep access to the U.S. auto market. Both sides had played down the prospect of a breakthrough, disappointing many of electronics, chips, and auto industries. Both countries have historically been key allies, but tensions spiked after hundreds of Koreans were detained in an immigration raid in last month. President Lee managed to negotiate down to 15% after Seoul said it will invest, as Mr. Moresco commented, $350 billion US dollars in the US and by $100 billion worth of liquefied natural gas. During the trip to Japan, Tokyo, the U.S. president signed an agreement on rare earth minerals, including the 15% tariff deal negotiated earlier this year. This is very important. What implies 15%? 15% of tariff will be added to the market price of cars in the United States, equally likely to Japanese cars. And then it will be the maximum range of affordability of relative competitiveness to rival Japanese cars. If 25% 25% were levied, then those kind of comparativeness will be broken down. Korean companies need to invest in the U.S. To slide in the allied supply chain, but 100% of cash investment might be a disaster. Think about it. How could continue partnership when your big success comes from your partner's dismal disaster? I'll say this trade deal could be a restoration of a mutual respect based on co-prosperity between two key trade partner countries.
Professor O, as Thomas earlier said, the $350 billion investment has been divided into 200 billion cash installments and 150 billion in shipbuilding and industrial cooperation. The cash installments, as Thomas mentioned earlier, face an annual cap of 20 billion to protect South Korea's foreign exchange market. Accordingly, the government here says the impact on the market will be minimal. Do you agree? And also, what are the gains for South Korea from such a hefty investment in the U.S.?
Yes, I do agree. Japanese case cannot be compared and applied to Korean case because Korean won is not a key currency, while Japanese yen is. When Japanese yen is a key currency, which is used for international settlement, among central banks around the world, they have Japanese yen reserves for preparation or for transaction. This might function as a reservoir in time of need, in time of uncertainty. Relatively speaking, Korean won is much more vulnerable to shock in the foreign exchange market because there is no reservoir outside of Korea. This is why currency swap contract is needed in advance of investment deal. The Korean economy made annual trade surplus of $40 billion on average in total. In this respect, within range of annual cap of $20 billion from the perspective of durability of Korean forex market, it will be within range of safety. So the Korean forex market will not be contaminated that much. As the concluding the deal, tariff reduction and access to the U.S. market, there will be a direct U.S. investment into Korea also made gains. These include foreign currency inflows that stabilize the Korean currency, enhance the industrial competitiveness, and influx of capital and technology into Korea. Lots of efforts to attract foreign direct investment in key technology push Korean companies to innovate and move up the value chain. Korean multinationals has strategically aimed to attract foreign investment in key sectors like IT convergence, smart robotics, biotech, and renewable energies to drive future economic growth.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Thomas, beyond trade, also following their bilateral talks last week, Mr. Trump shared support for South Korea's nuclear submarine ambition. Could you tell us a bit more about this support and what are the prospects of a future fleet of South Korean nuclear-powered submarines?
Yes, so this was a pretty big story that came out a little bit on the heels of the trade discussion. There wasn't much detail about it at the time, but then shortly after President Trump basically, which he often does, announced something on social media, then there was a bit of, catching up afterwards to try and sort out exactly what the details are. And there's still, some, I think maybe a lot of parameters that are not exactly clear. But Trump basically said that he was he gave South Korea approval to build a nuclear-powered submarine. And, this is powered by nuclear fuel, not a submarine, carrying nuclear weapons. But this is a huge deal for South Korea. I mean, this is something that Seoul has wanted to do for quite a while. I mean, particularly within, say, probably the last decade or so. I mean, these nuclear-powered submarines can stay submerged much longer, have a much greater range, I think are quieter than these kind of diesel-electric ones that they currently have. So, South Korea has had this as an ambition, particularly in the context of North Korea's advancements in its own capabilities. I mean, North Korea tested submarine-launched ballistic missiles and has said that they're building a nuclear-powered submarine and sort of displayed it to the world earlier this year. We don't know exactly to what extent that, how far along they are with that. So, so this was not, Lee Jae-myung had asked Trump for access to the fuel supply, which is a key element. South Korea has been limited in the kind of nuclear fissile material that it can enrich, to a certain percentage. But this deal, as we understand it, would give not just, it's not just permission, but it's sharing this sensitive technology, which the U.S. really has not done until very recently. I mean, Australia is the other example in recent years, where through AUKUS, where the U.S. agreed to help share the technology and help build nuclear-powered submarines. So this is really a big step forward within the alliance, and for North Korea, I think it's a case where it plays into both countries' interests as they currently stand. I mean, on the one hand, from the U.S. perspective, they have been, especially under this administration, have been pushing for allies to, carry more of the burden, especially kind of in regional affairs, for their own defense purposes, while at the same time, trying, perhaps in South Korea's case, to involve them more in efforts not only focused on North Korea, but also in the greater region, perhaps keeping an eye on China. And these kind of subs would allow South Korea to, move through the Yellow Sea, the East Sea, and sort of the wider Pacific region, and track Chinese and North Korean activity. And, really also places South Korea on a level with only a handful of other countries. It's like US, China, Russia, Britain, France, India, and Australia, the only countries that have nuclear-powered submarines. And, for South Korea, it also brings the South closer to this wartime operational control of its military, which has also been a big desire for at least the last few administrations. And President Lee has also expressed this desire, and this gives South Korea, a greater foothold in having the capacity to respond, on its own, rather than having to wait for the U.S. to control if anything were to happen. So, it kind of overlaps both of their interests. And, these submarines are apparently going to be built in the Philadelphia shipyard, which was bought by Hanwha recently, and that kind of also overlaps with this shipbuilding, partnership between South Korea and the U.S. All of that said, I think there still are questions. Hanwha, this shipyard, has not built naval vessels, has not worked with nuclear-powered vessels before, so there's going to obviously require some refitting of it. And I think, the timeline is not tomorrow. Some defense, I think it was the Minister of Defense, or have to cite exactly who it is. Yeah, I think Minister of Defense mentioned that, it would take probably around 10 years, or mid 2030s to sort of see this out, and had said maybe there would be around 4 that would be necessary. I mean, but these are all kind of still to be determined. So, but that's where things stand at the moment.
Right, and keeping this in mind and speaking within your capacity as a scholar, professor, what do you believe is the relationship between national security and economic cooperation? Also, do you believe this particular relationship has become perhaps more pronounced in recent times?
I've been long in the public sector of international trade, so I do know the importance of the strategic partnership between Korea and the United States. But as a scholar following terminology of U.S. Trade Act, they say themselves, PNTL, permanent normal trade relationship, should be based on trust between trade partners. I don't want to quote Kraljic matrix, which stresses the importance of managing bottleneck item as well as a strategic item in time of sudden supply disruption, raising issue of threatening national security by weaponizing of economic tools. When I learned in the States as a student, as if it were other countries' case, far from U.S. view, countries can use economic policy like a tariff or sanction as a form of weaponized leverage to achieve a political or strategic goal, potentially destabilizing the economic order, which generate a yield effect against the global economy. That relationship between national security and economic cooperation is changing globally as the rules of global order shift. Economic cooperation can enhance national security through interdependence and shared prosperity, but it can also pose risks if economic dependence becomes security vulnerabilities, over-reliance on another nation for a critical goods technology or a supply chain can create a vulnerability that can be exploited during time of tension. The fact is, both cooperation and competitions are used as tools, while trade can foster stability. Countries' economic strengths can be used to build its military power, and economic tools like a tariff can be used for political leverage. What is needed at this moment is global leadership of prosperity and not U.S.-only leadership.
Right. Meanwhile, Thomas, staying with nuclear-related developments, Mr. Trump has called on the U.S. to restart nuclear weapons testing. What's the latest on that front?
Right. So this was another kind of surprise that was announced via, President Trump's social media platform. And it came pretty much right before his meeting with President Xi Jinping of China on October 29th. And basically it was just, he tweeted out or said on social media that, that the U.S. would immediately restart nuclear weapons testing. Basically saying that, it was in response to China and Russia also doing such things, which, kind of drew a surprised response. I mean, as far as everyone knows, China and Russia haven't tested a nuclear weapon per se, and, I don't know since when exactly. But, this would end the moratorium, the U.S. moratorium that was announced in 1992. So, and then there was, again, a kind of figuring out what was meant fallout a bit afterwards. And, Trump on Sunday was on, interview news program, and basically was saying that Russia was testing, China was testing, they're doing these secret nuclear tests, and, was basically saying that it was necessary to keep up with these rival nations. But at the same time, the Energy Secretary in the U.S., Chris Wright, who would be the one, that's the department that would oversee such tests, was saying that the initial testing would be non-critical, he called it, which is not involving, explosive nuclear detonation. So not expecting to see, a mushroom cloud in the desert in Nevada or something. It was basically talking about doing component system tests for advanced, next generation technology. No confirmed timeline for any of this. And I think, basically what they are responding to is, Russia in particular has held trials of some of its advanced nuclear-capable systems, including a Poseidon underwater drone. But these were not, testing nuclear warheads. And obviously North Korea is in the picture as well as really being the country that has been, most recently has tested nuclear weapons. So, it seems, on the one hand, is it leverage, bluster? But on the other hand, it does sort of fit into some of the priorities that this current administration and the Defense Department has discussed as far as modernizing its weapon systems and keeping up with China. Obviously, it's also alarms arms control experts. There are just worries about undermining this kind of global moratorium, triggering a new arms race. The Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, putting the credibility of those at risk by participating. I mean, it's hard to condemn North Korea for doing nuclear tests if you yourself are doing it, I suppose. I think obviously for allies too, there's some concern. I mean, it could destabilize. But again, it's sort of a lot of words at this point that, it's hard to know exactly where it's going to lead.
Right. But Professor, despite these latest developments, that is, on the international security front, the South Korean stock market has been rallying in recent days. How do you explain the stellar stock market performance here in the country?
Simply speaking, the stellar performance of Korean stock market is primarily explained by the AI-driven semiconductor boom. Korean multinationals like Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, which accounts for a large portion of cost index, are central to the global AI supply chain. Strong earnings reports and a semiconductor super cycle have driven their stock price to a record high, pulling the entire markets up. The rally has extended to other key industries as time goes. Strong performance has been observed in defense and shipbuilding, automobile and batteries, which driven by stable export channels and demand for energy storage solutions. Foreign investors, previously net sellers, have poured capital back into the market, purchasing trillions of won worth of stocks. Could assign into the capital market. This inflow is driven by the attractive, relative undervalued market expectations for continued growth in tech sector. A reduction in trade conflicts of fears between the United States and China has provided relief to Korea's export-dependent economy, further boosting market sentiment. In this sense, this kind of stellar performance will be continued.
Right. And the stock market back on Monday surpassed the 4,200 mark for the first time, Thomas. Moving forward, Thomas, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is here for annual security talks. What has been shared about these particular talks?
Right. So Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, or as he calls himself, Secretary of War, on Monday visited the DMZ and the border truce village of Panmunjom alongside South Korea and his South Korean counterpart, An Gyu-bak. And, basically, they had their annual security talk, the Security Consultative meeting on Tuesday. And pretty much what we know was from a press conference they held afterwards. And, I think just in a bigger picture, it's a show of, I think there's, from the South Korean side, glad to see that the defense secretary was here, and a show of sort of support for the alliance, and the on the heels of this relatively successful, I think, APEC summit as well. So that's a positive sign. You might remember a few months earlier, Hegseth actually skipped South Korea on his trip through Asia. I think during this period of this transition between administrations and concern that things were not under control here, or we're not ready. So, it's good, I think, on that regard. But basically, he discussed, they said they're going to release a communique to lay out more what they discussed. But, Hegseth said that North Korea, Seoul will remain focused on deterring North Korea as its main objective, but there has been discussions, that have been floating around in the last, under this administration, basically, suggesting that maybe the U.S. troops stationed in South Korea might be used, more looking towards regional conflicts, including, maybe something between China and Taiwan. And Hegseth didn't really, said that, protecting against nuclear-armed North Korea is the main goal, but, mentioned there's no doubt that flexibility for regional contingency is something we would look at. So that's in the works. And, clearly there was some discussions about things like defense costs and other issues. And, Washington has been, has wanted, the Trump administration in particular has wanted Seoul to share a greater portion of the cost-sharing agreement. So that may be, something we're gonna see come out. Although I think South Korea, he said South Korea has been a model ally. He mentioned Trump allowing the nuclear subs to be built, and said, we want to ensure that they have the best capabilities in their own defense. We want our allies to be strong. So, I think South Korea has probably done as much as could be expected to sort of meet the demands of this administration. And, Seoul does have a relatively higher share of defense spending compared to a lot of its, NATO and even Japan, other sort of cohorts. So that's, more or less, I think we'll see more coming forward, but that was the highlight of what they talked about.
All right. I suppose the phrases defense modernization or alliance modernization and strategic flexibility are phrases we'll continue to see in the near future. All right, Thomas, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
And Professor Oh, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Well, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.
필라테스 기구는 전 세계에 4가지 기구가 있습니다. 캐딜락, 리포머, 배럴, 체어. 거기에서 할 수 있는 동작이 대략 한 2, 3천 개가 되는데 추가적으로 발레 운동, 그다음